James Carter was once called the tech prodigy of New York. His face had been splashed across the covers of Forbes and Wired, hailed as the genius who turned a simple mobile app into a multi-billion-dollar empire. His name had meant power, money, and influence. But today, in the tiny rural town of Ashton, Georgia, James wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even recognized. He was just another man in faded jeans and a wrinkled shirt, pushing a small plastic basket through the fluorescent aisles of Ashton Market, the only grocery store for 20 miles. The late afternoon rush had filled the place with chatter and clattering carts. Mothers scolded restless children, teenagers laughed too loudly near the candy shelves, and the smell of fried chicken from the deli counter lingered in the air. James kept his head low, avoiding eye contact, and picked up only the bare essentials: a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a couple cans of soup, less than $20 worth of food. To the locals, it was nothing. To James, it was everything. These small errands, these small purchases, this was the anonymity he had been craving. He stepped into line at the register. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes and a ponytail, rang up his items and gave him a polite but indifferent smile. 1842, she said, sliding the cans down the scanner. James reached for his wallet. He pulled out a card, sleek, heavy, matte black, the kind of card that once opened doors to penthouse suites, private jets, and Michelin-starred tables. He placed it carefully in her hand, a trace of his old confidence flickering in his chest. The cashier slid it through the reader. Beep. She frowned. Tried again. Beep. She tapped the machine. Swiped again. Then the screen flashed in harsh red letters. Declined. The sound was louder than it should have been. Or maybe it was just that everyone seemed to hear it at once. The people waiting in line leaned forward. The mother with 2 kids smirked. A man in a baseball cap muttered under his breath, "Guess money doesn't buy everything." Someone snorted. Another wannabe big shot. Another voice chimed in. James felt his face heat up. His throat tightened. For a split second, he wanted to explain. He wanted to shout that it wasn't his fault that banks make mistakes, that even billionaires have glitches. He wanted to remind them who he was. But who was he now? The cashier gave him an awkward look. "Do you have another card, sir?" James hesitated. He didn't. Not here. He had walked away from that world, from the endless accounts and assistants who managed them. He had wanted to strip his life down to something simple, something raw. But now that simplicity was suffocating him. Behind him, laughter bubbled. One man pulled out his phone and whispered, "This is gold. Rich guy can't pay for bread." James felt as though every eye in Ashton Market was drilling into his skin. He wanted to vanish into the floor tiles. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, he felt a tug at his sleeve. He looked down. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, stood there holding a tiny pink coin purse decorated with faded stickers. Her braids framed a pair of wide brown eyes, filled with something he hadn't expected: kindness. She unzipped the purse, pulled out a crumpled handful of coins and a couple of wrinkled dollar bills, and pushed them toward him with both hands. "You can use mine," she said softly. "It's my emergency money, but you need it more." For a heartbeat, the entire store went silent. The snickers died. The mutters stopped. Even the cashier froze, her hand halfway to the register. James blinked. He couldn't process it. This child, with her mismatched shoes and patched-up backpack, was offering him everything she had. "No, sweetheart, his voice cracked. "I can't take your money." But the girl's gaze didn't waver. "Mama says if you see someone standing alone, you should stand with them." You looked alone. The words pierced straight through him, sharper than any insult. James Carter, the man who had once commanded boardrooms, who had once been toasted with champagne on private yachts, was standing alone in a grocery store, being offered salvation. Not by wealth, not by power, but by the fragile kindness of a child. The crowd shifted uneasily. Shame spread across a few faces. The man in the baseball cap looked down at his shoes. The mother pulled her children closer. The cashier cleared her throat. "Sir, we can hold your items if you'd like." But James couldn't move. He could barely breathe. That single act of compassion had undone him completely. For the first time in years, he felt small, human, stripped bare. He knelt down so he was eye level with the girl. "What's your name, Emily?" she said proudly. "Emily." He forced a smile, though his eyes burned. "You've already given me more than you know." "Thank you." Her little fingers curled tighter around the money. "Are you sure?" "Yes," James whispered. "I'm sure." The line shuffled forward, and someone coughed impatiently. But the air in that store had shifted. The sneers were gone. All that remained was the echo of Emily's words, ringing in James's mind like a bell he couldn't unhear. "If you see someone standing alone, you should stand with them." As James stepped away from the counter, empty-handed and hollow, he realized this was only the beginning. Ashton, Georgia had just stripped him of his armor, and in its place, a little girl had handed him something he didn't know he needed, a reason to stay. James Carter walked out of Ashton Market empty-handed. The neon open sign flickered above the door as if mocking him. The warm Georgia evening air pressed against his skin, yet he felt cold inside, hollow, like a man who had just lost something he couldn't name. The humiliation clung to him, the whispers, the laughter, the flashing red word declined. He replayed the moment again and again, each time feeling the sting sharper. But cutting through the shame was the image of Emily's small hands, clutching her crumpled bills. That act of kindness wouldn't leave his mind. He sat on the curb outside, staring at the cracked pavement. Cars rolled in and out of the lot. Nobody paid him any attention. And for James, who had once been chased by paparazzi, that anonymity was both a blessing and a curse. "Excuse me." The voice pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up. It was Emily. Her braids swung as she hurried over, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Beside her walked a woman in scrubs, dark circles under her eyes, hair tied back hastily. She had the look of someone who worked long nights, someone who carried more weight than she should have to. "Emily, what did I tell you about running off?" the woman said, her tone stern but softened by exhaustion. "Mama, this is him," Emily insisted, pointing straight at James, the man from the store. The woman turned. Her eyes landed on James, and for a moment, recognition flickered not of his fame, but of his situation. A man sitting alone outside a grocery store, shoulders heavy with something unspoken. "I'm Rosa," she said, extending a cautious hand. "And this is my daughter, Emily. I hope she didn't bother you back there. She's bold." James stood, brushing off his jeans, and shook her hand. "Not at all. In fact, he stopped, words catching in his throat. "She helped me more than she knows." Rosa tilted her head, studying him. "Most grown men don't let a child see them vulnerable. That says something." James shifted uncomfortably. Vulnerable. The word made him want to run. But something about Rosa's calm gaze rooted him in place. "I'm sorry about the store," Rosa added. "People here can be quick to judge. They see someone different and assume the worst." James gave a dry laugh. "That's true everywhere." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Emily fidgeted, then piped up, "Mama, can he come to dinner, please?" Rosa blinked. "Emily, please." Emily's voice was insistent, hopeful. "He doesn't have anybody. I can tell." The words hit James like a blow. She had seen through him with the clarity only children have. He opened his mouth to decline, to politely excuse himself. After all, he had spent years building walls, hiding behind distance and money. He didn't accept dinner invitations from strangers. But then he caught the way Rosa looked at him, not pity, not suspicion, just a quiet openness. An unspoken "you can say yes if you want to." And against his own instincts, James nodded. I'd be honored." Emily beamed, bouncing on her toes. Rosa sighed but smiled faintly. "All right then. It won't be much, but you're welcome." Their house was a modest two-bedroom on the edge of Ashton. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked underfoot, but the small garden out front was full of sunflowers leaning toward the evening sky. Inside, the space was cramped but warm. Family photos lined the walls. Rosa in her nursing scrubs, Emily holding up school projects, a few faded Polaroids of a man James assumed was Emily's late father. "Make yourself at home," Rosa said, setting down her bag. "Dinner won't take long." James lowered himself onto a worn couch. The spring squeaked, but the familiarity of it, the lived-in imperfection, made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. Safe. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, opening her backpack. She pulled out construction paper and crayons. "Wanna draw with me?" she asked brightly. James chuckled. "It's been a long time since I drew anything." "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to be good. You just have to try." Her words echoed in his head, strangely profound. "You just have to try." He took a crayon, awkwardly sketching a lopsided house. Emily giggled. "That's not bad," she teased. By the time Rosa returned with 3 plates of spaghetti, James felt lighter, as if Emily's crayons had drawn away some of his burden. They ate at a small wooden table scarred with years of use. The meal was simple spaghetti with jarred sauce, garlic bread from the day-old shelf, but to James, it tasted richer than any Michelin-star dinner. "So," Rosa asked between bites, "what brings you to Ashton? We don't get many new faces." James hesitated. The truth was too complicated. Just needed a change, he said carefully. "Somewhere quieter." Rosa nodded slowly, accepting the half-truth without pressing. Emily twirled her fork. "Are you gonna stay here forever?" James smiled faintly. "I don't know yet. You should," she declared. "People here need helpers. That's what Mama says. And I think you could be one." Rosa shot her daughter a look. "Emily." But James didn't mind. In fact, the words stirred something deep inside him. A helper. When was the last time anyone had called him that? His old world had called him visionary, disruptor, genius. But helper, never. After dinner, Rosa offered him coffee. They sat on the porch as Emily chased fireflies in the yard, her laughter filling the twilight. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from," Rosa said softly, staring out at the horizon. "But I know what it looks like when someone carries too much alone. I see it every night at the hospital." James looked down at his hands. For so long, he had hidden behind numbers, contracts, and screens. Here, in this small house in Ashton, a nurse and her daughter saw him more clearly than anyone in Manhattan ever had. "You're kind to let a stranger in," he said quietly. Rosa sipped her coffee. "Kindness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it." The porch light flickered. Emily ran up the steps, cupping her hands to reveal a glowing firefly. "Look, Mr. James." "It's like a tiny lantern." James leaned closer, mesmerized by the fragile creature. In its small, flickering light, he saw a reflection of himself, fragile, overlooked, but still burning. For the first time in years, James Carter didn't feel like the billionaire, the genius, or the failure. He just felt human, and somewhere deep down, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Ashton was where he was meant to be. The days passed slowly in Ashton, Georgia, for James Carter. Each sunrise felt like both a punishment and a gift. He woke in the rented room, above the old hardware store downtown, where the walls smelled faintly of dust and oil, and the ceiling fan groaned each time it spun. Gone were the plush penthouses of Manhattan, the glass towers where he used to stare down at the city he believed he owned. Here, when he opened his window, he didn't see a skyline. He saw a sleepy Main Street, a faded diner sign, and children riding bikes with streamers fluttering from the handlebars. It should have felt like exile, but strangely it didn't. Almost every evening, James found himself at Rosa's house. He told himself it was to repay their kindness, helping fix the creaking porch steps, mowing the overgrown lawn, carrying groceries in from Rosa's beat-up sedan. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about repayment, it was about belonging. Emily was relentless in her determination to include him. She demanded he attend her art shows in the living room, where she taped crayon drawings to the wall and narrated their stories. She made him taste her experiments in the kitchen, sometimes edible, sometimes disastrous. And every night before bed, she asked the same question, "You're staying, right?" James never knew how to answer. One Saturday afternoon, the town square was alive with chatter. Farmers set up stands piled with peaches and tomatoes. Kids ran around with cotton candy. A fiddler played on the corner. James walked through the square with Rosa and Emily. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking over his shoulder for cameras or shareholders. He was just another face in the crowd, at least, until he wasn't. Near the fountain, a group of teenagers leaned against their bikes, scrolling on their phones. One of them suddenly froze, then looked up sharply, his voice cracked with excitement. "Wait a second, is that James Carter, the app guy?" Heads turned. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "That's him. No way. What's he doing here? Didn't he, lose everything?" James's chest tightened. He could feel the shift, instantly the weight of recognition. The anonymity he had clung to shattered in an instant. Within minutes, townspeople gathered. Phones rose. Faces leaned in. Some looked awestruck. Others looked amused. "Thought you were on yachts with models." A man jeered. "What Ashton market too glamorous for ya?" "Hey, billionaire," another shouted. "Buy us all dinner with your fancy black card." Laughter rippled through the crowd. James's mouth went dry. The humiliation from the grocery store came rushing back, magnified by 100 voices. Emily clutched his hand, confused. "Why are they saying that? What do they mean?" Rosa stepped forward, her voice firm. "Enough. Leave him alone." But the crowd didn't stop. They smelled blood. James's instinct screamed at him to run. But instead, he drew in a shaky breath and faced them. "Yes," he said, voice trembling. "I'm James Carter. And yes, I lost everything." The square fell silent. "I built an empire," he continued, his words cutting through the hush. "I had more money than I could ever spend. But I lost sight of everything that mattered. And now I'm here, in Ashton, trying to figure out who I am without all of that." The honesty in his tone startled even him. He had never spoken so plainly, so vulnerably. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a voice from the back called out, "So what? You think you're better than us just 'cause you had money?" James shook his head. "No, that's exactly the point. I'm not better. I'm just like you. Maybe worse." The fiddler shifted uncomfortably. The teenagers lowered their phones. One by one, the crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads, others whispering, but the energy had shifted. The hostility dulled. Rosa placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes," James said quietly. Watching the last of the onlookers drift away, "I did." That night, back on Rosa's porch, the weight of the day hung heavy. Emily sat curled in her chair, half asleep, while Rosa and James stared out at the quiet street. "You know they'll talk," Rosa said softly. "Word will spread. Ashton isn't the kind of place where secrets stay buried." "I know." James rubbed his temples. "But maybe I was tired of hiding. Maybe it's time people saw me for what I really am." "And what's that?" Rosa asked. He looked at her, his eyes raw. "A man who wasted everything chasing more. And now I'm here, trying to learn how to be useful, to be human again." Rosa studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Well, if you really mean that, Ashton could use someone like you. But not as a billionaire. As a neighbor." Emily stirred, mumbling in her sleep. "He's a helper. Mama told you." Rosa smiled faintly, out of the mouths of babes. James sat back, the night air cool on his face. For the first time since losing his empire, he felt something unfamiliar but steady. Not control, not power. Hoped that by Monday morning, James Carter's secret was no longer a secret. The whispers that had started in the town square spread through Ashton like wildfire. By the time the sun rose, everyone from the barber at Main Street to the teachers at the elementary school knew. The man who had been quietly fixing Rosa's porch and helping Emily with her drawings wasn't just any drifter. He was that James Carter, the billionaire who had risen fast, fallen faster, and somehow landed in their sleepy little town. Some folks were curious, others were thrilled, but many were skeptical. At Ashton Diner, the heart of local gossip, the debate was already raging. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air as regulars huddled in booths, their voices sharp. "I'll tell you what it is," said Hank Miller, the mechanic. His arms, covered in grease up to the elbows, rested on the table. "It's a stunt. He's probably hiding money somewhere, laughing at all of us for falling for his act." Across from him, Marjorie, the librarian, shook her head. "You didn't see his face, Hank. That man's been broken. No amount of money hides that kind of hurt." "Broken or not," muttered Mrs. Carmichael, the mayor's wife, "people like him don't just change overnight. Leopards don't change their spots. You watch trouble. Follows money, and he's proof. A waitress carrying a pot of coffee leaned in. Well, if you ask me, anybody who helps Rosa and that sweet little girl can't be all bad. Did you hear he fixed their steps, nearly broke his back doing it? Hank snorted, fixing a porch. Don't erase a lifetime of greed. The diner buzzed louder, opinions clashing like cymbals. Ashton was no longer one quiet town, it was a town divided. Meanwhile, James kept to himself. He avoided the diner, avoided Main Street, and instead poured his energy into Rosa's neighborhood. He helped patch roofs, carried groceries for the elderly, even mended a broken swing at the park. Emily followed him everywhere, declaring him her official helper buddy, and yet, no matter what he did, the stares followed. Some eyes softened with gratitude, others narrowed with suspicion. One afternoon, as James carried lumber across Rosa's yard, a voice rang out from the sidewalk. "Hey, Carter." He turned. A tall man in a crisp suit leaned against a car that was far too shiny for Ashton. His smile was thin, calculated. "You really think you can play small-town hero?" The man drawled. "People here might buy it, but not me." James frowned. "Do I know you?" The man smirked. "Not yet. Let's just say I know your type. You can paint fences, patch roofs, play helper all you want. But when the novelty wears off, you'll run. Because men like you always run." James tightened his grip on the lumber. His instinct was to fire back, but something about the man's calm, taunting tone stopped him. Before he could respond, Rosa appeared on the porch, arms crossed. "Is there a problem?" she asked sharply. The suited man tipped his hat. "Not at all, ma'am. Just giving your guest a little reality check." Then he slid back into his car and drove off, leaving dust in his wake. James stood frozen, jaw clenched. Rosa stepped closer. "Who was that?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But he's right about one thing. I can't outrun my past forever." That night, the town held a community meeting at the church hall. The topic was supposed to be the annual fall festival, but it didn't take long for the conversation to shift. "Why is no one addressing the elephant in the room?" Mrs. Carmichael demanded, rising from her seat. "We've welcomed a billionaire failure into our town. Do we really want Ashton to be known for harboring him?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marjorie stood. "With respect, Mrs. Carmichael, James has been nothing but helpful. He's done more for Rosa's neighborhood in 2 weeks than most of us have in years." "That doesn't erase who he is," another voice snapped. "A man who gambled with people's jobs and lost." James sat in the back, silent, every word landing like a stone. He hadn't wanted to come, but Rosa insisted. "If you want to belong, you can't hide," she had said. Finally, an elderly man named Walter, who ran the town's hardware store, raised his cane and stood. "I lost my pension when your company collapsed, Carter," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "Do you know what that felt like?" The hall went still. James rose slowly, his throat tight. "Yes," he said hoarsely, "because I lost everything too. I know it doesn't make us even. I know it doesn't bring back what you lost. But I swear to you I'm not here to hide. I'm here to make things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." His words hung in the air, heavy, raw. Some faces softened, others hardened. The divide was clear. Half the town was willing to give him a chance. The other half wanted him gone. After the meeting, Rosa walked beside James in silence. Emily skipped ahead, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Finally, Rosa spoke. "You stood up there and told the truth. That takes guts." James shook his head. It felt like tearing open an old wound. "And I don't even know if it mattered." "It mattered," Rosa said firmly, "to the ones who were listening." But James could still feel the eyes of those who weren't, the ones who saw him as nothing more than a fallen billionaire trying to play the hero. He had chosen Ashton to disappear. Instead, he had become its most talked about secret. And the more the town divided over him, the more James wondered, would Ashton ever truly accept him? The weeks that followed the community meeting were a test of will. For James Carter. Each day was a chance to prove, if not to Ashton, then to himself, that he could be more than a ghost of his empire. The whispers still chased him down Main Street, The suspicious stares still lingered when he walked into the diner. But he had learned something crucial. Words didn't build trust. Actions did. And so, he acted. It began with a roof. Walter, the elderly hardware store owner who had lost his pension when James's company crumbled, came home one evening to find James on a ladder, hammer in hand, repairing the shingles that had been leaking all spring. Walter froze at the bottom of the porch steps. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Fixing what I can," James said without looking down. One nail at a time. Walter's jaw clenched. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shove the ladder over and tell James Carter to get the hell off his property. But instead, he stood there, watching as the man who once ruined his retirement now mended his roof under the scorching sun. When James finally climbed down, sweat dripping from his temples, he didn't ask for thanks. He just nodded and walked away. Walter stared at the fixed roof in silence for a long time. From there, the work multiplied. James began showing up at dawn at the community center, where the ceiling tiles sagged and the basketball court floor was warped from years of neglect. He pulled up rotted boards, scrubbed moldy walls, patched holes. Soon, kids who had nowhere else to go were dribbling basketballs again, their laughter echoing through the once abandoned space. He organized food drives, at Rose's insistence, convincing skeptical shopkeepers to donate supplies. He worked side by side with farmers in the fields, blistering his hands and tearing his clothes. He helped rebuild a playground in the poorest part of town, where Emily proudly painted the swings. "Help her, Buddy Blue." The whispers didn't vanish. Some townsfolk muttered that he was only trying to buy redemption with sweat instead of money. Others scoffed that it was all a performance, a mask. But little by little, something began to shift. When the elderly Mrs. Green's heater broke, James fixed it. When the Johnsons' barn collapsed, James hauled lumber to rebuild it. When the church basement flooded, James was knee-deep in cold water, bailing it out alongside the pastor. Every act, however small, chipped away at the wall Ashton had built around him. One evening, Rosa invited him to dinner again. The table was simple: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, biscuits warm from the oven. Emily chattered non-stop about her day at school, her words tumbling faster than either adult could keep up with. Finally, as the plates cleared, Rosa leaned back and studied James. "You've been working yourself to the bone," she said. "Why?" James hesitated. He could feel her eyes searching his face, not for excuses, but for truth. "Because," he said slowly, "I spent years thinking success was about what I could take. Money, power, recognition. But now I realize it's about what I can give. And maybe I can't undo what I've done, but I can build something better here." Rose's expression softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Actions matter, James. But so does honesty. People here don't need a savior. They just need a neighbor they can trust." James nodded. "Then that's who I'll try to be." Emily leaned across the table, her little hands gripping his. "You already are. You're our helper buddy forever, for the first time in a long time." James laughed, not the forced, hollow laugh of a man putting on a show, but a laugh that rose from somewhere deep, somewhere healing. But redemption was never going to come without resistance. One morning, as James was sweeping the community center steps, the same suited man who had taunted him weeks earlier appeared again. "Quite the show you're putting on," the man said, smirking. "Fixing barns, painting playgrounds, Ashton's little hero. I wonder how long before they realize you're still the same Carter, who let thousands lose their jobs." James straightened. "If you've come to watch me fail, you might be disappointed." The man chuckled. "Oh, I'm not here to watch. I'm here to help it along. Because make no mistake, this town doesn't belong to you. And I'll make sure they never forget who you really are." He turned and strolled away, leaving James with a fresh knot in his stomach. Whoever he was, he carried a darkness with him and a warning James couldn't ignore. That night, James sat on Rose's porch, staring into the dark. The cicadas hummed in the trees, the town quiet around them. "You can't change everyone's mind," Rosa said softly, sitting beside him. "Some folks will never forgive, no matter what you do." "I know," James admitted. "But maybe forgiveness isn't the point. Maybe the point is showing them I won't run this time, that I'll stand here and take whatever comes. Rose's eyes lingered on him. That man who came by. He's dangerous. You need to be careful. James clenched his fists. I've lived my life surrounded by sharks. I thought I left them behind in New York, but maybe they've followed me here. He looked out at the quiet town he had begun to love, at the lights twinkling in the distance, at the porch where Emily's laughter had filled the air so many nights. For the first time, he realized he had something worth protecting, not money, not power, but people. And he knew redemption wouldn't just mean rebuilding himself. It would mean defending Ashton from the storms he had unknowingly brought with him. The storm broke on a Thursday evening. Ashton's streets were quiet, the sun dipping low behind the pines. James Carter was at the community center hammering the last nails into the rebuilt fence when headlights cut across the gravel. The sleek black sedan was out of place here, its engine too smooth, too predatory. From it stepped the man in the tailored suit, the same shadow who had haunted James since the day the town learned his name. This time, he wasn't alone. Two men in dark jackets followed, their presence heavy, deliberate. James set the hammer down, his pulse quickening. You've made your point already, he said, voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. What do you want? The man's smile was thin, sharp. What I've always wanted, Carter. Leverage. Power. The same things you wanted. Once upon a time. I'm not that man anymore. Oh, but you are. The man stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching on gravel. You can paint barns and kiss babies all you want, but underneath it all you're still the billionaire who gambled and lost. And now Ashton is paying for your sins. James's jaw tightened. Leave Ashton out of this. Why should I? The man's voice dropped to a hiss. This town has something I want, and with your name tied to it, I can bleed them dry before they even realize it. All I need is your silence. The next day, rumors spread. The suited man, his name whispered as Collins, wasn't just a stranger. He was a developer with a reputation for gutting small towns, buying land cheap, and turning it into profit. Word was, he'd already made offers on properties across Ashton. And now, with James's tarnished legacy hanging over him, Collins planned to twist the knife. If Ashton protected Carter, the town would crumble under lawsuits, debt, and ruin. The town divided once more, sharper than ever. At the diner, Hank, the mechanic, slammed his fist on the counter. I knew it. He brought this trouble on us. First his empire, now this vulture sniffing around. If Carter leaves, Collins leaves too. That's the only way. Marjorie, the librarian, shook her head. Throwing him out won't save us. Collins won't stop until he owns everything. James is the only one who stood up to him. The arguments grew louder, spilling into the streets. Some townsfolk glared at James as he passed. Others nodded at him with wary hope. Ashton was no longer just divided over his past, it was bracing for war over its future. James spent that night on Rose's porch, staring at the dark horizon. Emily had long since gone to bed, clutching the stuffed bear he had patched for her. Rosa sat beside him, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. You don't owe Ashton this fight, she said softly. You could walk away, start over somewhere, else no one would blame you. James shook his head. That's the problem. I've walked away from every hard fight in my life. When my company started to crack, I abandoned ship. When people lost everything, I hid. If I leave now, I'll never be anything but the coward they think I am. Rosa studied him in the quiet. Then you'll need to stand taller than you ever have, because Collins won't fight fair. James met her eyes, steady and resolute. Neither will I. Not this time. The showdown came at the next town hall meeting. The church was packed, every seat filled, every wall lined. The air was thick with fear and anger. Collins stood at the front, polished and smug, presenting his plan. New development, jobs, growth, modernization, words coated in honey, but dripping with poison underneath. When murmurs of approval rose, James stepped forward. Listen to me, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. This man doesn't care about Ashton. He doesn't care about your homes, your families, your history. He cares about one thing, profit. And when he's finished, You'll be left with nothing but broken promises and boarded-up shops. Collins laughed. And why should they trust you, Carter? You ruined more lives than I ever could. At least I'm honest about what I want. The crowd stirred, torn between the two men. James's chest ached, but he didn't falter. You're right, Collins. I made mistakes. Huge ones. I hurt people. But here's the difference: I stayed. I didn't come here to take. I came here to give back. And if you want Ashton, you'll have to go through me. The hall erupted, some cheering, some shouting, some demanding silence. The divide was raw, but for the first time, James felt something shift. Not in everyone, but in enough. Because when Walter, the old hardware store owner, rose to his feet, the room stilled. I lost my pension because of this man, Walter said, his voice steady, and I hated him for it. But I've watched him. I've seen him sweat, bleed, and fight for us. Collins promises money. Carter has given us something more, himself, and I, for one, would rather stand with a man who has fallen and risen again than with a man who's never cared at all. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Collins's smile faltered. The battle wasn't over that night. Collins would make threats, file papers, push harder. But he had lost something crucial, the town's blind trust. And James had gained something he never thought he would again. Loyalty. In the weeks that followed, Ashton rallied. Farmers refused to sell. The church raised funds for legal fees. The community center became not just a place for children, but a war room where neighbors planned their defense. And James stood at the center. No longer an outsider, no longer just a fallen billionaire. He was part of Ashton, its sweat, its fight, its heart. On a quiet evening months later, Rosa, Emily, and James sat on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker in the warm Georgia air. Emily leaned against him, her voice drowsy. "See, Mama, I told you. He's our helper buddy forever." Rosa smiled faintly, her eyes meeting James's. "She's right, you know." James looked out at the town that had once judged him, once doubted him, once nearly turned him away. Now it was his home. And for the first time since losing everything, he didn't feel like a fallen billionaire. He felt like something far greater. A man redeemed.